Cowboy brought her home thinking she was injured, but it was an ancient Apache marriage ritual. The sun was already low when Daniel rode along the edge of the canyon trail. The sky held a quiet golden color that stretched across the open land, making the dry grass glow softly. His horse moved at an easy pace, familiar with the path after years of routine rides. Daniel preferred these late evenings. The ranch felt calmer when the wind slowed and the noise of the world faded into the distance. Out here, there were no expectations, no conversations he needed to avoid, and no reminders of the life he had once imagined for himself. He had lived alone on the ranch for nearly 6 years. People in the nearby town respected him but knew little about him. They described him as reliable, calm, and honest. He helped neighbors during storms and never refused work when someone asked for help. Yet he kept his distance when it came to personal matters. Some believed he had lost someone important long ago. Others said he simply preferred quiet. Daniel never corrected anyone. Silence was easier. The trail curved around a rocky ridge where the ground dropped into a narrow valley below. As he guided his horse around the bend, something unusual caught his attention. At first he thought it was just a shadow or a bundle of cloth left behind by travelers, but as he moved closer, he realized there was a person sitting near the edge of the path. He slowed the horse immediately. A young woman sat there, her posture straight despite clear signs of exhaustion. Her dark hair moved slightly in the wind, and her clothes showed dust from a long journey. She was not lying down or calling for help. She simply watched the horizon as if waiting for something. Daniel felt a quiet unease. People did not usually sit alone in this area without a reason. He stopped a few feet away and spoke gently. "Are you all right?" The woman turned her head toward him. Her eyes were calm but tired, and she studied him carefully before answering. "I will be," she said softly. Her voice carried strength even though she seemed weak. Daniel noticed a small scrape on her arm and the way she shifted her weight slowly, as if walking had become difficult. "You look like you've been traveling a long time," he said. "Do you need help?" She hesitated, not refusing but not immediately accepting either. After a moment, she nodded once. That simple movement felt heavier than a long explanation. Daniel dismounted slowly so he would not appear threatening. He kept his movements calm, giving her space to decide whether she trusted him. Years of ranch life had taught him patience. Animals and people both reacted better when given time. "My place isn't far," he said. "You can rest there, just until you feel stronger." She watched him for another long moment, as if measuring something beyond his words. Then she stood carefully. When she tried to take a step, her balance faltered slightly. Daniel moved forward but stopped himself from grabbing her, waiting until she signaled she accepted help. She placed one hand lightly on his arm, steadying herself without speaking. The ride back to the ranch felt quieter than usual. She sat behind him on the horse, her presence warm but distant, like someone who belonged to another world. Daniel sensed she was aware of every movement around her, from the rustling grass to the changing colors of the sky. She did not ask questions about where they were going or who he was. Instead, she remained silent, as if silence itself held meaning. As they approached the ranch, the familiar wooden fences and small house came into view. The building stood simple but strong against the wide landscape. A windmill turned slowly in the distance, and a few cattle grazed calmly near the barn. For Daniel, the place represented safety, routine, and distance from complicated emotions. He helped her down carefully. She paused for a moment, looking at the house with a thoughtful expression. It was not fear or hesitation he saw, but something deeper, almost respectful. "You can sit inside," he said, opening the door. "I'll get water." The house was clean but simple, filled with practical items rather than decorations. She walked slowly through the space, observing everything without touching anything at first. When Daniel returned with a glass of water, she accepted it with both hands and gave a quiet nod of thanks. "My name is Daniel," he said after a moment. She looked at him directly. "Lila," she replied. The name settled in the room like a soft echo. He brought a small medical kit and cleaned the scrape on her arm. She did not react strongly to the discomfort, showing quiet resilience. While he worked, he noticed she seemed less focused on her injury and more aware of the surroundings. Her gaze moved toward the windows, the corners of the room, and the door as if she were memorizing the layout. "You don't have to talk if you don't want," he said gently. "But if someone is looking for you, I can help." She shook her head slowly. "I came here by choice." Most travelers he encountered had clear destinations or stories to tell. Her response raised more questions than it answered, yet he chose not to push. Trust came slowly, and forcing conversation rarely helped. As the evening deepened, Daniel prepared a simple meal. Lila watched quietly from the table, occasionally offering small gestures of assistance without speaking. When he placed the food in front of her, she paused briefly, closing her eyes for a moment before eating. The gesture felt ceremonial, though he could not explain why. Later, he noticed something else unusual. She took a small object from her pocket, a smooth stone tied with a thin piece of leather, and placed it carefully near the window. Then she moved to another corner and adjusted a chair slightly before sitting again. The movements seemed deliberate, not random.
"Is that important?" he asked carefully. She gave a small smile.
"It is a way of saying thank you," she said. Daniel accepted the answer, though he did not fully understand it. As darkness settled outside, the ranch grew quiet except for the sound of wind against the walls. He offered her the spare room, explaining she could rest there safely. She listened carefully, nodding once before walking toward the doorway. Before entering, she paused and looked back at him with an expression he could not fully read, part gratitude, part determination. Left alone in the main room, Daniel felt a strange sense of change, as if something unseen had shifted within his ordinary life. He told himself he had simply helped someone in need, nothing more. Yet when he stepped outside later to check the animals, he noticed a figure standing near the gate at the edge of the property. An older man stood there, silent and still, watching the house from a distance. The moonlight revealed calm eyes and a posture filled with quiet authority. Daniel felt the air grow heavy with unspoken meaning. The man did not move closer, but his presence made it clear that Lila's arrival was not a simple accident. The night stretched quietly between them, carrying the feeling that something much larger had begun, something Daniel did not yet understand, but could no longer ignore. The older man did not move when Daniel walked toward the gate. The moonlight fell across the open land, creating long shadows that stretched between them. Daniel felt alert, but not afraid. There was something calm and steady about the stranger's presence, as if he stood there with purpose rather than threat. Daniel stopped a few steps away. "Can I help you?" he asked quietly. The man nodded once. His face showed age and wisdom, and his eyes seemed to notice everything without judgment.
"You already have?" he said in a low, steady voice.
Daniel frowned slightly, unsure what that meant. The man stepped forward slowly, careful and respectful, as if crossing into someone else's space required thought. "My name is Thomas," he said. "I came because she is here." Daniel immediately understood he was talking about Lila. "She needed help," he replied. "I just brought her somewhere safe." Thomas studied him for a long moment. The silence between them did not feel uncomfortable. It felt like a test of patience. "I believe you," Thomas said finally. "And that is why I am here." Daniel opened the gate and gestured for him to come closer. "Would you like to come inside?" Thomas nodded and walked beside him toward the house. The older man moved slowly but with confidence, as if every step had meaning. Daniel noticed how he looked at the land, the fences, and the sky, almost as if he were greeting them silently. When they entered the house, Lila was already standing near the doorway, as though she had sensed his arrival. She gave Thomas a respectful nod, and he returned it. No words were exchanged at first, yet Daniel felt a strong connection between them.
"I didn't know she had someone looking for her," Daniel said, trying to understand the situation.
Thomas looked at him kindly. "She is not lost," he said. She walked exactly where she meant to walk. Daniel felt confusion grow. Then why was she alone on the trail? Lila remained quiet, allowing Thomas to speak. The older man sat down slowly, his hands resting calmly on his knees. You showed her kindness without asking for anything, Thomas said. That is important. Daniel shifted slightly, unsure why his simple act of helping seemed to carry so much weight. Anyone would have helped, he said. Thomas shook his head gently. Not everyone. The sound of wind outside moved softly against the walls. Daniel sensed that the conversation was leading somewhere serious. There is something you should understand, Thomas continued. What happened today may not be what you think. Daniel crossed his arms loosely, listening carefully. I'm listening. Thomas chose his words slowly, as if each one mattered. He explained that some traditions still lived quietly within their community, even if the outside world rarely noticed them. These traditions were not about rules or pressure, but about meaning and choice.
In our history, Thomas said, there were ways for people to show trust without speaking many words.
One of these ways involved a journey, a test of endurance and intention. Daniel glanced toward Lila, who stood calmly near the wall.
She did not interrupt, Thomas continued.
When someone completes such a journey and accepts shelter under a man's roof, it can represent a question, not a demand. A question. Daniel felt tension rise in his chest. What kind of question? A question about partnership, Thomas said gently. Daniel blinked, surprised. You mean marriage? Thomas nodded slightly. Not in the way you might think. It is not a binding promise unless both people choose it freely. It is a way of asking, will you show kindness when you do not understand? Will you offer safety without expecting reward? Will you listen before judging? Daniel felt overwhelmed. He looked at Lila, hoping for clarification. Is that why you came here? He asked her. She met his gaze calmly. I came because I believed you would help, she said softly. Her answer felt honest, but incomplete. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. I didn't know any of this, he said. I thought she was injured, and you still helped, Thomas replied. That matters. Daniel walked slowly toward the window, staring out at the dark land. He felt a mixture of relief and pressure. He had never imagined that helping someone could carry cultural meaning he did not understand. I don't want to disrespect anything, he said quietly, but I also don't want to be part of something without knowing. Respect begins with honesty, he said. No one expects you to accept anything you do not choose. The words eased some of Daniel's tension. He turned back toward them. So what happens now?
That depends on both of you, Thomas said.
The tradition opens a path. It does not force you to walk it. Lila stepped forward slightly. You gave me shelter, she said. That was enough. Daniel studied her expression, searching for pressure or expectation, but he found none. She seemed calm, almost peaceful. Are you staying? He asked carefully. For now, she answered, if you allow it. Daniel hesitated only a moment before nodding. You're welcome here until you feel ready to leave. Thomas watched the exchange quietly, then stood up. I will return to the community tonight, he said. You both have time to think. Daniel walked him back to the door. Outside, the night air felt cooler and the stars stretched across the sky like silent witnesses. You don't seem worried, Daniel said as they reached the gate. Thomas chuckled softly. Worry is for things that cannot be changed. This is simply a moment of choice. Daniel leaned against the fence. Why me? Thomas looked toward the house where Lila's shadow moved behind the window. Because she believed you would act with kindness without knowing why. And you did. After Thomas left, Daniel remained outside for several minutes, thinking about everything he had heard. His life had always followed clear routines. Now suddenly there was uncertainty. Not dangerous, but unfamiliar. When he returned inside, Lila was sitting quietly at the table. The small stone she had placed earlier remained near the window, catching the moonlight. I hope this isn't uncomfortable for you, she said softly. Daniel shook his head slowly. I'm just trying to understand, she nodded. Understanding takes time. They sat together in silence for a while, sharing the quiet without pressure. Daniel noticed how peaceful the house felt, despite the complicated situation. Instead of tension, there was curiosity, a feeling that something meaningful might grow if he allowed it. Before going to sleep, Daniel paused near the doorway of the spare room. "If anything makes you uncomfortable here," he said, "tell me." Lila smiled gently. "I will." As he closed his own door later, Daniel realized his life had changed in a single evening. He had helped a stranger, expecting nothing more than a good deed. Now he stood at the edge of something deeper, a connection shaped by tradition, choice, and trust. Morning arrived slowly over the ranch, bringing soft light that stretched across the open fields. Daniel woke earlier than usual, not because of noise, but because his thoughts refused to stay quiet. The conversation with Thomas replayed in his mind again and again. He had always believed life followed simple rules: help people when they need it, work hard, and avoid unnecessary complications. Now those simple rules felt connected to something deeper he had never considered before. He stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. The sky held a pale blue color, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant earth. Everything looked the same as always, yet Daniel felt different inside. He checked the fences and walked toward the barn, focusing on familiar tasks to calm his thoughts. When he returned to the house, he noticed Lila already awake. She stood near the porch, watching the sun rise quietly. Her posture looked relaxed, as if she belonged there, even though she had arrived only the day before. "Good morning," Daniel said. She turned toward him and nodded gently. "The land wakes early," she said. Daniel smiled slightly at the way she described it. "It does," he replied. "Coffee?" She accepted with a small nod, following him inside. The morning felt calmer than he expected after everything that had happened. They sat at the table without pressure, sharing quiet moments between small conversations. "You don't have to help with anything," Daniel said. "You should rest."
I feel strong enough, she replied.
"I prefer to work." Daniel hesitated but finally agreed. He showed her the barn, explaining how he fed the horses and organized tools. She listened carefully, learning quickly without asking many questions. Her movements were steady and thoughtful, as if she treated every task with respect. As the morning continued, Daniel noticed something surprising. Lila worked with confidence around the animals, approaching them calmly and gaining their trust almost immediately. One of the horses that usually stayed distant allowed her to stand close without hesitation. "You've done this before," Daniel said. She smiled slightly. "In different ways." Her answers often felt like pieces of a larger story she chose not to explain fully yet. Daniel respected that, understanding that trust grew slowly. Later that day they rode together to check the far pasture. The open land stretched endlessly around them, and the sound of hooves created a steady rhythm. Riding beside someone felt unfamiliar to Daniel. For years he had preferred solitude, convincing himself that working alone made life easier. Yet now he found himself appreciating the quiet companionship.
"Do people in town know about your traditions?" he asked carefully.
"Some do," she answered. "Some misunderstand.
Some forget." Daniel nodded. He understood how easily people judged what they did not know. He thought about the rumors that might already be forming if someone had seen Lila at his ranch. As if his thoughts had called it into existence, they encountered a neighbor named Carl near the fence line. Carl waved and rode closer, curiosity clear on his face. "Didn't know you had company," Carl said with a friendly smile. Daniel felt slightly uncomfortable but introduced Lila politely. She greeted Carl with calm respect, her presence quiet yet confident. After a few casual questions about cattle and weather, Carl rode away, but Daniel sensed the conversation would not end there. Small towns noticed everything. When they returned to the ranch, Daniel leaned against the fence, watching Lila move through the yard. She seemed fully present, noticing details most people ignored. The direction of wind, the way light touched the ground, even the sounds of birds overhead. "You observe a lot," he said. She nodded. Observation helps us understand without speaking. Daniel thought about how different her perspective felt from his own practical routines. Yet instead of feeling uncomfortable, he felt curious. As the days passed, a new rhythm formed between them. Lila stayed at the ranch, helping with chores and sharing quiet conversations in the evenings. Daniel found himself opening up more than he expected. He spoke about losing his parents years ago, and how loneliness had slowly become normal for him. Lila listened without interruption, offering understanding through presence rather than advice. In return, she shared small pieces of her own life. She spoke about growing up between tradition and modern expectations, feeling pulled between two worlds. Some people expected her to abandon old ways. Others expected her to follow them completely. The journey she had taken, she explained, was about finding balance. One evening, while sitting near the porch, Daniel asked the question that had been on his mind since Thomas visited. "Did you really come here because of that ritual?" She paused, considering her answer carefully. "The ritual is not a trap," she said softly. "It is a way of learning truth. It shows how someone responds when they believe no one is watching." Daniel nodded slowly. "And what did you learn?" She looked at him with a gentle smile. "That you help without asking why." Her words felt simple but carried deep meaning. Daniel realized that the situation was less about tradition and more about character. Despite the growing connection, challenges appeared. Some people from town began asking questions when Daniel visited the store. A few spoke kindly, but others hinted at misunderstanding or concern. Daniel felt protective of Lila, not wanting anyone to judge her unfairly. "You don't have to stay if this causes trouble," he told her one evening. "I stay because I choose to," she replied calmly. Her certainty surprised him. He realized she was not seeking protection. She was choosing partnership through shared experience. One afternoon, a strong windstorm rolled across the land, forcing them to work together to secure equipment and guide animals into shelter. The shared effort brought laughter and trust. Daniel noticed how naturally they worked as a team, anticipating each other's movements without needing many words. After the storm passed, they stood near the barn watching the clouds clear. The air felt fresh, and the ground shimmered slightly from light rain. "This place feels different now," Daniel said quietly. "How?" she asked.
"Less empty," he admitted. She did not respond immediately, but her eyes softened.
That night, as Daniel sat alone for a moment, he realized how much his life had changed within a few days. The ranch no longer felt like a shield against the world, but like a space shared with possibility. He understood that the ritual was not controlling him. Instead, it had opened a door to understanding someone else, and perhaps understanding himself. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the land in soft shades of gold and amber. Daniel walked along the fence line, inspecting the cattle and checking the gates, but his mind was not on the work. The days with Lila had begun to shift something deep inside him. He had never expected to feel connection or curiosity so strongly in such a short time. Yet, here he was, thinking about her even as he moved among the familiar surroundings. Inside the house, Lila prepared breakfast. She moved quietly but efficiently, her actions confident and deliberate. Daniel entered and leaned against the doorway, watching her work. She noticed him and gave a small, polite nod, but continued without distraction. There was a calm strength in her, something that reminded him of the land itself, steady, patient, and resilient. "Coffee?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. She nodded and smiled faintly. "Yes, please." As he poured the coffee, he thought about the conversation they had shared with Thomas. He understood the meaning of the ritual now, yet he still had questions. This was not about pressure or obligation. It was about choice, about observing character and kindness in action. And Daniel realized that he had changed during this time. He had opened his home, his mind, and his heart without knowing why or expecting anything. That alone felt like a lesson. When breakfast was finished, they decided to check the far pasture together. The sky was clear, and a soft breeze moved across the rolling hills. Riding side by side, Daniel felt a new rhythm in the day. Lila's calm presence seemed to harmonize with the steady pace of the land. She spoke little but observed much, noticing changes in the grass, the distant movement of cattle, and even the direction of the wind. Daniel admired how attentive she was, as if every detail mattered. "You notice everything," he said quietly. "I try to," she replied. "It helps to understand the land and people." Daniel thought about how often he had worked alone, seeing but not fully observing, moving through life without paying attention to the small signs around him. They spent the day tending to the ranch together. Lila learned quickly, guiding the cattle into pens and helping with repairs to the fences. She worked with strength and patience, and Daniel noticed how naturally she adapted to the routines. At the same time, she began sharing more of herself. She spoke about her upbringing, the balance between tradition and the modern world, and the importance of respect in all things. Daniel listened intently, realizing that she was teaching him as much as he was helping her. Later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Daniel suggested a short walk near the edge of the canyon. The air had cooled slightly and the colors of the land deepened with the fading light. They walked in silence for a while, each step deliberate and careful. The only sound the soft rustle of grass under their boots. "I want to understand," Daniel said finally. "Not just about the ritual, but about you, and what brought you here." Lila stopped and turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I came here because I needed to know if someone could act with care without knowing everything. If someone could protect and respect me not because of duty, but because of choice." Daniel felt a weight lift from him. He had spent so long in solitude, believing that relationships were complicated and dangerous. Yet her words reminded him that true connection did not require certainty or expectation, only honesty and kindness. Over the next few days, Daniel and Lila continued to work and talk together. Their routines became familiar but never dull. They shared meals, repaired barns, tended the animals, and walked the land. Through each shared task, Daniel observed Lila's thoughtfulness, her quiet strength, and her understanding of the world. In turn, she noticed his reliability, his care for the land, and the honesty he offered in every action. One afternoon, as they were mending a fence, Lila paused and looked out across the pasture. "You have created a home here," she said softly. "Not just a house, but a place that is steady and strong." Daniel paused in his work, considering her words. "I've always thought of it as my duty," he said. "But maybe it is more than that. Maybe it is what we make of it, with the people we allow inside." Lila smiled faintly, and for a moment the air between them felt lighter. Daniel realized that her presence had transformed the ranch in ways he had never expected. The land seemed more alive, more connected, and even the animals responded differently when she was near. As evening approached, Daniel suggested they sit outside and watch the stars. The sky stretched wide above them, filled with countless points of light. They sat quietly on the porch, letting the calm of the night settle around them. "I never imagined my life could feel like this," Daniel said finally. "So quiet, and yet so full." Lila nodded. "Sometimes we don't notice what we need until it appears in front of us," she said. "And sometimes we are tested to see if we will respond with care." Daniel realized she was speaking of the ritual again, but in a way that made it feel less like tradition, and more like a lesson about life itself.
It was not a demand or obligation. It was an invitation to show kindness and respect without expectation.
The following days brought small challenges. A neighbor came by to ask questions about Lila, curious about her presence on the ranch. Daniel answered honestly, careful to protect her privacy while explaining the situation with respect. Some people accepted the explanation, while others remained skeptical. Yet Daniel felt confident, because he had learned to trust both Lila and his own judgment. During these times, their bond continued to grow. They worked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments that spoke more than words could. Daniel noticed that he no longer feared connection, and Lila showed that trust could be given to someone who acted with integrity. One evening after a long day of work, they sat near the fire outside. The flames flickered softly, casting light across their faces. Daniel realized how much he had come to rely on her presence, not for guidance, but for understanding. She had taught him patience, observation, and the importance of choosing kindness, even when the world was uncertain. Lila spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I did not come to force anything. I came to see if kindness could exist without expectation. Daniel nodded. And it does, he said. It exists here, because of you and because of us working together. The night grew darker, and the fire's warmth provided comfort against the cool air. Daniel realized that life had changed. He no longer saw the ranch as a place of solitude, but as a space of connection, learning, and trust. Through shared work, quiet conversations, and mutual respect, Daniel and Lila had begun to understand one another. The ritual that had brought her there was no longer a mystery. It was a symbol of choice, care, and character. Daniel felt gratitude, not only for the lesson it had taught, but for the presence of someone who had quietly reshaped his understanding of life and relationships. As the stars moved across the sky, Daniel knew that this was only the beginning of a deeper connection. It was a bond built not on obligation but on choice, respect, and the shared experience of everyday life. And for the first time in many years he felt a sense of belonging that went beyond the land he cared for. It was a sense of belonging to something larger than himself, a connection forged quietly, naturally, and with care. The next morning, the ranch felt alive in a way Daniel had never noticed before. The sunlight stretched across the hills, warming the dry earth and casting gentle shadows along the fences and barns. Birds sang in the trees, and the cattle moved calmly, grazing in the open pastures. Daniel rose early, not because he had any urgent tasks, but because his thoughts kept him awake. For the first time in many years, his life felt uncertain in a good way, full of possibility rather than solitude. Lila was already outside, tending to the horses. She moved with ease, guiding the animals into the stable while speaking softly to each one. Daniel watched from the porch, admiring her patience and quiet confidence. She seemed completely at home on the land, almost as if she belonged there naturally. He had always known the ranch was his life, but now he felt it could be something more, something shared. He walked over to her and greeted her quietly. "Good morning." She looked up and smiled faintly. "Morning," she replied. "The land wakes early, and there is much to do." Daniel nodded and joined her. Together they fed the animals, repaired fences, and worked through the morning chores. Their movements were coordinated without needing words, each learning the other's rhythms and anticipating their needs. Daniel noticed how much easier it was to work with her by his side. The ranch felt lighter, calmer, and more alive. By mid-morning, they paused near the edge of the field. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the wind on his face and the warmth of the sun on his shoulders. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about what Thomas and you told me. About the ritual and why you came here." Lila nodded, listening intently. "It is not about forcing anyone," she said. "It is about understanding, about seeing character in action. You acted with kindness without knowing why. That is what mattered." Daniel looked at her, realizing how much he had learned in just a few days. "And what I feel, what I want now, is my choice. But I want to understand you, truly." She smiled gently. "Then that is enough. Understanding comes slowly, but it is worth the effort." The rest of the day passed in quiet activity. They worked in the fields, repaired broken tools, and prepared food together. Daniel noticed small details about her that made him admire her more. Her careful attention to the animals, her patience when things went wrong, and the gentle way she treated every task as meaningful. Lila, in turn, observed Daniel's steady nature, his respect for the land, and the quiet honesty in his actions. In the evening, they walked to the nearby stream. The water flowed calmly over smooth rocks, reflecting the orange and pink hues of the sunset. They sat together on the bank, letting the peaceful sounds of nature fill the space between them. "You changed my life in ways I didn't expect," Daniel said quietly. "I thought my life would always be simple and lonely. But now, it feels different." Lila nodded, her expression soft. "Sometimes life brings people together to show them what they were missing, not by force, but by choice." Daniel reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "I want to be part of this with you. Not because of tradition, not because of obligation, but because I choose it."
Lila's eyes softened.
"And I choose the same," she said. As the stars began to appear in the sky, they returned to the ranch together. That night, Daniel stayed awake longer than usual, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. He thought about the ritual, about Thomas's words, and about the quiet strength and patience that Lila had shown him. He realized that what mattered was not the rules or customs, but the understanding and respect that grew between two people over time. The following days were filled with quiet harmony. They worked together on the ranch, shared meals, and spent long evenings talking under the stars. Daniel introduced Lila to small routines that had been his life for years, and she introduced him to her ways of observing and understanding the world. Through shared effort and conversation, a deep connection formed, built on trust, respect, and choice. One afternoon, they decided to visit her community. Thomas welcomed them warmly, explaining that the ritual had not been a demand, but an invitation to see character and care. The elder spoke kindly, confirming that the path of choice was what truly mattered. Daniel listened, grateful for the clarity and understanding. Returning to the ranch, Daniel felt a new sense of purpose. The land, once a refuge for solitude, now held a shared life full of possibility. Lila moved through the house and fields with confidence and ease, and Daniel realized that their partnership was stronger than any ritual or tradition. It was built on mutual respect, shared effort, and genuine care. Evenings became their time for reflection and conversation. They shared dreams, discussed their hopes for the future, and acknowledged the lessons they had learned from the past. Daniel appreciated how Lila helped him see life differently, not just as a series of tasks or routines, but as a space to grow, learn, and connect. One night, as they sat by the fire outside, Lila spoke quietly. "This connection, it is real, because it is chosen. Not forced, not expected, just chosen." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "I understand, and I am grateful for it every day." The land stretched around them, quiet and calm, yet full of life. Daniel realized that this moment, the shared work, the quiet understanding, the respect and trust, was the true meaning of home. He no longer felt alone, and Lila no longer needed to test him. Their bond was real, steady, and meaningful. In the days that followed, Daniel and Lila continued their life on the ranch with a new rhythm. They worked together, laughed together, and faced small challenges as a team. Neighbors began to understand and respect their relationship, seeing the genuine care and cooperation between them. Daniel realized that true connection did not come from rituals or traditions alone. It came from honesty, kindness, and the choice to be present in each other's lives. The story of that first meeting, of kindness and observation, became a quiet lesson for both of them. Daniel learned that opening his heart and home could bring unexpected understanding, and Lila learned that trust could grow when met with respect and care. Together, they built a life that honored tradition, celebrated choice, and embraced the simple beauty of shared days on the land. By the time the sun set on another day, Daniel stood on the porch and looked over the pastures. The ranch no longer felt like a place of solitude. It was alive with possibility, with laughter, with connection. Lila approached quietly, placing a hand on his arm. He turned to her, smiling. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. And in that quiet moment, under the wide sky filled with stars, the ranch became more than a home. It became a place where two people had chosen each other freely, built trust, and learned the true meaning of kindness, care, and connection. They had found something stronger than tradition, deeper than expectation, and more meaningful than either could have imagined alone. From that day forward, Daniel and Lila's life on the ranch continued, filled with shared work, quiet understanding, and the knowledge that the bond they had built was theirs alone, chosen, respected, and deeply valued. Their story was no longer about a ritual, a test, or a challenge. It was about life, choice, and the power of kindness to change everything.